Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Clarice. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, we have Ardelia working with Clarice and Esquivel to kind of profile Joe Hudlin, because the thing is, handling things the way he has been has not been like the most, like, if you want to kind of like make these bodies disappear, it would have been easy, put them in a barrel drum and just that's it. But it's like you put them out in the open, the bite marks, this and that, going through all the trouble he's going through to make them look like the murders that they weren't, like trying to make it seem like, oh, this is some rogue crazy serial killer, when in actuality it's a well orchestrated conspiracy. But it's like, why? Because obviously we now know like he's getting a chunk of money, like 10 million on the back end of this like murder that's going on. So it's like, why is he, is it just for the money? But it's like for him to go above and beyond like he is, it's like Clarice kind of describes him as an artist, because he kind of wants to showcase the fact that he's kind of showing off because he needs an audience. I guess it's almost like he kind of gets off on the fact is of like, right, this is kind of what I've done. You could try and catch me, but you're not going to. Like he wants, because the first and foremost part is like he's trying to strike fear into the family members. It's like, oh, like look at this, someone that you care about, and look what I've kind of done to them. It seems it's just like to be able to do stuff and know that you had the power to do it and kind of get away with it. He's kind of like power trippy in that regard. So obviously they bring this to Paul and everything, so the conversation then becomes like, okay, Tripathi shows up, and so they're going to bring him into the fold, and Paul's going to bring the AG into the fold, which Ruth wasn't too happy about, now only just finding out about all of this. But obviously for Paul, it's like, we didn't have enough concrete evidence to bring to you, so... But this is how we got to handle things, and this is what we know now, like Joe Hudlin, this merger and all that, but... She's kind of pissed right now, too, because this is still dealing with the aftermath of Catherine getting locked up. She's not in jail. She's actually in a, psychiatric facility, getting the help she actually needs. But for, what bothers Ruth so much is, like, the fact is that Clarice did that. But, even Paul being like, I would have done it if I was in her shoes, too. It's like, Clarice should have just done what she's told. She has a hard time doing that. But for Paul, he's like, the fact of the matter is... saving her wasn't enough to just kind of save Catherine. Like, the fact is that you and I kind of just thought it would be, but it wasn't. Like, Clarice is right, and it's costing both of us in many different regards, because obviously Paul's got to deal with all of the, like, well, for one, it's because his name is, being used as, like, if this all comes down, like, it could all fall back on him, because it seems like he, his name is on some report, so it's like he can take the fall for it. And now Ruth can end up taking a fall because of everything with Catherine and everything. So it's like, Clarice is right. Granted, she's still costing us in many aspects in our lives, but it's still the thing of she is right. So, and then at the very least, Catherine is getting the help she needs. And even later on, she calls her mom and she's like, I know this isn't the easiest thing for you. This isn't the greatest thing for you. But honestly, she's like, I feel not as alone here. Like, I don't feel as crazy. I feel like, there's other people here, even some who are funny. But it's like she's actually getting the help she needs to process everything. And for her, it's like, thank you for sending Clarice. So it's like kind of making her mom realize, like, sending Clarice what, like, I might not have liked it. I might not like the current circumstances, but my daughter, she's finding some balance of normalcy. It's going to be a long journey, I'm sure. But I think for her, it's like, at least things could be moving. My daughter's at least moving in the right direction once again, instead of kind of being stuck in Paul's, in life, So I think that was just kind of interesting. But, obviously, they get a phone call from Julia being like, if you guys want me to, I can look further into this. But then, like, Clarice as well as Clark was like, no. And I think that speaks so much volumes is that, like, nah, like, a lot of the stuff Clark brought up last episode, I was like, nah, like, he legitimately is worried and cares about her. And it's like, I think probably because I was wondering, like, I was wondering whether he was legitimately being sincere about the whole thing about her hair. And it's like, I think it, like, seeing her and everything, I think it brought something back. It was almost like having his sister in the same room with him again, I think. Especially after spending so long with him. I think it did just kind of remind him of that. And so I think because of that, he is very protective of her, even more so because, like, right, seeing her reminds him of his sister, and also, like, what happened to his sister. I think it's just, like, he is kind of a little protective when it comes to Julia. I thought that was fascinating. That both of them said, like, Clarice and him said it. And it's like no one took notice of it, though, but it's like the fact is Clark does care about her well-being in the long run. So obviously Clarice talks to Paul about like she wants to confront Joe because they learned from Julia that the merger is happening right now. Obviously they're getting all that they can, like, subpoenas and stuff like that, but that's going to take some time, and apparently this merger is going through right now. So she wants to go. I'm trying to remember, is this before? Oh no, this is after she talked to Tyson, because she's trying to get a better understanding of Hudlin, trying to understand if he's the man that she thinks he is. And even then, like, Ty kind of confirms some stuff of like, right, like, my dad has been making moves that he normally wouldn't. Like, the fact is, it's just like this selling this company, like, is going to break my dad's heart in the long run. He just doesn't know it yet, but it's a situation where he feels like Joe is kind of whispering in his dad's ear. That's why he kind of feels like my dad, like, so it does seem like Joe might be the one pulling the strings. It's like, right, his dad's getting older and Joe's able to kind of convince him, like, oh no, this is the right thing to do. So she goes to Paul about like wanting to sit down with Joe, because Joe's so smug that you get him start talking, he's going to slip up and hang himself. But, Paul doesn't want her to do it because it's like, right, this seems a little too personal, which I think on some level, I think Clarice is giving a look almost like, really, bro? Like, this is kind of personal for you too, but I guess it's like, it's a little bit of a different thing because he's not actively confronting Joe despite everything. I mean, he's still playing along so that Joe doesn't know, like, they know about everything. So he's like, all right, well, you can go bring Tripathi and Esquivel with you. She's like, I think he's like, He's like, the fact is, every time you say stuff like that, I lose more confidence in you. You either take Tripathi and Esquivel or you stay behind. And she's like, yes, sir. Because it is the thing of, like, every time she does that, like, going alone usually ends up with her kind of in a terrible situation. She's done it time and time and time again. It's kind of a really bad habit she has a hard time breaking. And I think it stimulates from stuff with her dad, but we'll get to that later. But they show up, and obviously running into Joe, confronting him face to face. This is her first time officially meeting face to face, and she couldn't help but think back to that when he knocked her out. So, but she keeps her cool, and they talk. And obviously he's as in like, oh, what's this all about? And they like bring up Naomi. They're like holding a lot of cards to their vest. They're not bringing up the women. They're not bringing up the Paul thing, because it's like, right, let's not let him know what we know. Let's call an audible, as Tripathi kind of says. So. But, like, Clarice is kind of pushing his buttons in certain regards of, like, I think poking at his ego a little bit, which I thought was kind of really interesting. Because he's like, oh, I don't know anything about the sales rep. But it's like, oh, isn't your job? It's like, oh, like, but do you know how many tampons are in the women's bathroom? Kind of almost like belittling his job and stuff like that. Because I think she wanted to poke him enough for his ego to be like, shut up, I'm so important. You don't know what I'm capable of doing. Like, for he'll, like, once again, hang himself. But ultimately, it's like, Hagen decided, like, oh, I want to talk to Clarice. And he's like, yeah, he wants to see you alone. And Tripathi's like, oh, wow, you probably screwed up. The fact is that you're not allowed to, like, continue this conversation. He wants to talk to Clarice by yourself. And even Esquivel being like, oof, So, obviously, the beginnings of that conversation, it was interesting because he was like, okay, she's like, I'm here with the death of your employee, Naomi. It's like, oh, no, I'm not talking to you about that. I want to talk about your relationship with my son. And you're like, that's interesting. What's that all about? Because it's like, they find out, like, right, because Hudlin, they told, yo, what about the merger and everything? It's like, how'd you know that about the merger? He's like, oh, it's privileged information. It's like, I'm going to sue you guys. The fact of the matter is, I'm going to find out how you know what you know. It's like, it doesn't work like that, Even Tripathi later on being like, well, you're trying, like, oh, take you in. It's like, oh, for what? It's like, well, you're threatening to sue me and everything. So, forget it. Well, you'll answer, like, so-and-so's questions or whatever. But, circling back to Hagen, like, what was interesting, though, is immediately, like, the moment he's, like, looking, like, references to painting and stuff like that, and then the way he says, women, you're like, oh. He said that with such disdain and disgust. I was like, I was like, oh, wait. So now we're finding out, like, Hudlin he's much like so many other people, he's still middle management. He's higher middle management, but he's still just middle management. Like, everything seems like it trails from Hagen. So the fact is, but he's asking all these questions about, like, what are you trying to get from being with my son? It's like this painting, even, like, the company's name. I never knew this. Like, Allosaur, it's, like, apparently, like, another name for, like, Zeus. which is interesting. Like, obviously, like, Zeus is, for one, the god of everything. You named your company after it and everything. But Zeus is also the son of Kronos. And so it's like, oh, so you named your, like, this, it's almost like your son is like, yes. And Clarice starts poking at the fact that it's like, yeah, you have a son. This was your baby. This was your everything until you actually had an actual son. Because obviously they go over, like, you know, because it was interesting. They were really, like, I'm not well versed in all things Greek mythology. I know some Greek mythology because of the God of War games. Some Greek mythology I just, like, found out on my own, just, you know, just out of personal interest in Greek and Norse mythology. Those are kind of the only mythology. I know some, like, Japanese mythology as well, but I'm still not well versed. I'm, you know, regardless, but they talk about Kronos, how Kronos basically was so scared of his children that he basically devoured all of them. Zeus only got away because of his mother, which I'm like, oh, that's interesting on many different levels, because it seems like Clarice is learning, like, unraveling certain things in her mind about her dad, which is interesting. And then maybe you can make the argument her mom sending her away was her or trying to help her daughter, you know. But it's almost, but she's more so drawing parallels between Hagen's situation and Kronos and Zeus to, like, him and Tyson, because it's like, you know, but for him it's like, no, it's a different, like, that's one interpretation of, like, him eating it, you know. But for him it's like, basically we tell these myths and stories to our children to kind of get them along a certain path, you know. And, you know, Clarice is like, what story did you tell your son, you know, at the end of the day? And so it's so interesting, that whole back and forth in discussion, and once again using this, like, Greek mythology as an allegory / metaphor for, like, what's going on in this particular case. It's just like the dude seemed off, like, the moment he was talking the way he was. And obviously it's like him pushing back on Clarice by being like, oh, like, you know, why do you do what you do? Because it's like basically suggesting, like, the monsters she catches, like, I've read, like, the Tatler and stuff like that about you and everything, and it's like, so you catch these monsters who are nothing more than essentially bugs. It's like, without you, you are the most exciting thing that's ever happened to their lives, like them being caught and brought to the limelight by the Clarice Starling. Like, other than that, like, they have no meaning. And so, but Clarice kind of takes offense to that, because it's almost like you saying they're bugs, it's making it seem like everyone, like, they've ever killed all their victims are insignificant as well. But then she kind of turns the table on him a little bit, where it's like, you know, with the whole Tyson thing, even suggesting, like, oh, maybe you start to question whether or not he's yours. And he says, slams the desk, never doubt what's mine. And it's like, okay, so interesting possessiveness we've kind of got there. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Maybe there's kind of deeper reaches with that, of, like, where that's coming from. I mean, he's someone all about, like, I've got all this. This is me. I'm so great. I'm so amazing, that it's like, it makes you wonder, like, what does he, like, see in Tyson? Like, is Tyson just, like, does he look at Tyson as a disappointment? Is that because she had also brought up the parallel of, like, Tyson, your only son, or did you lose other children as well? Because you make the reference to, like, Kronos and everything, but Kronos ate the rest of his children with the exception of Zeus. So what he's trying to get across, I wasn't quite sure, like, what he wants. I mean, it just seems, once again, he's kind of what she was describing as Hudlin, which maybe the artist stuff still applies to Hudlin, but maybe it also applies to Hagen as well. That maybe he wants to kind of assert his dominance and power over people and everything by showing, like, you know, and it begs the question why. I mean, Tyson, there's also the conversation about blind spots, because Tyson had talked about the fact that his dad seems to have a blind spot when it comes to Joe, which everyone kind of has. But part of me is immediately starting to think, like, oh, with their conversations and just the interactions they've had for the past couple episodes, I'm like, it seems more like Ty might be a blind spot for Clarice. I mean, everyone has their blind spots, but I think Tyson's biggest blind spot is actually his dad, because he's not able to see his dad the way he thinks he can. Because I think for him, he kind of has the impression, like, you know, it's like, you lost your dad at a young age. I found mine at an older age, and yet everything we do is in their name and for them. So for Tyson, it's like he's holding on to the fact that I got a dad in my life. I'm going to do everything I can to impress him. I'm not going to disappoint him. So like he sees Clarice as more like, oh, you're using me to get my dad, but he's not able to see his dad the way he really is. And Clarice is reluctant to destroy that for him because it's like, right, this is like this because a lot of foundation of who he is built around like the dad he never had in his life, the dad he never knew until he got to know his dad. So I think Clarice doesn't want to break that foundation of what kind of built him up to where he is now. So I think that reluctancy is why she doesn't ultimately tell him the truth. I mean, because obviously, like, he spent, like, the reason why, like, Clarice is on Hagen's radar in the first place is because Ty, like, is so enamored with her and talks about her with his dad, you know? So, which that, I guess, kind of speaks volumes about the relationship. The fact is that he talks to his dad about her, you know, and it's like, you wouldn't think they'd have the relationship they have, that he'd, like, you'd think he'd be, like, the powerful father that's so far to reach that the son can never really talk to him or anything like that. The fact is they have enough of a relationship for him to be like, oh, yeah, there's this woman named Clarice and everything, yada, yada, yada. He even saying, like, oh, yeah, I am very protective of my son. It's like, is that because you're legitimately protecting of your son, or is it just kind of, like, supposed to be Ty is supposed to be a reflection upon you? Like, him being compromised in any shape or form is like you being compromised, that you're so narcissistic and self-centered that everything is about you. I don't know if that's kind of the route they're going, like if that's just my misinterpretation of it. So, at the same time, Julia is still doing whatever she can to help out, to the point that she sneaks in, gets some files that they're going to need, and she starts faxing them, you know, and obviously Paul is kind of organizing them, and obviously Clark is getting more of them. They end up sending Esquivel, which I love. Esquivel's like, why I got to do grunt work? And, you know, Tripati's like, because you're the grunt, you know? So, obviously, Julia ultimately gets caught, and you're like, oh, that's not good, especially because word gets back to Hudlin, who then goes to Hagen, and it's like, okay, and as Clarice is listening, she looks in a reflection in the mirror and sees that it's the fake Baltimore cop that showed up when Welling was killed. So she excuses herself, and she meets up with the others, and it's like, right, they've probably found out about Julia, and that go-to hitman dude is here, so we need to jump on that immediately. That was about to get nasty the way they're just like, I know, don't worry about the paperwork, we got Julia, and walk away, and you're like, oh, God. Luckily, the moment home dude was like, oh, I'm gonna go get the car. So I guess when everything went down, he just kind of disappeared, because the last thing you want is him in sight, because if he's there, it's like, hey, you're supposed to be a cop, right? They probably could have brought him in, so that's probably why he just disappeared. But before because I was about to say, like, Esquivel probably could take the shot, but before anything went down, Joe was like, whoa, there's been a misunderstanding, like, my security overreacted. It's Julia, just a misunderstanding, you can go. She's like, and everyone's like, you okay? And Jolie's like, yeah, it was just a misunderstanding. It's like, okay, everyone gets to walk away. Because obviously there was a reluctance. I believe it was like Hagen that wanted things to kind of be taken care of, but you have, like, I think Joe was the one that was like, yeah, but we want it done on the property? Like, that's going to draw too much attention. So luckily everyone just kind of backs away and walks away, so they didn't get to kill Julia like they wanted to. Obviously Paul is like, I need you, Clarice, to get Ty and kind of get him turned against his dad. But obviously for her, it's like she doesn't want Ty mixed up in his. It's like, I think the way Paul was asking him, like, do you think his father would actually hurt him? And it's like, she'd just rather not anything happen to him. So once again, he's kind of filling that void of, like, when she looks at him, I think she sees her brother, in particular the one that died. So I think, you know, 'cause we haven't really seen her resonate like that with any other sibling. It's just that one in particular. So I don't know. But to the point, she even told Ty, like, oh, I'd be scared if something happened to you. And he's like, oh, you're just manipulating me. That basically you're telling enough of a sob story to kind of manipulate me on my emotions and stuff like that. He's like, well, tell me then. And she can't. And he's like, well, don't ever call me again. Because now he feels like, oh, you're just using me for information. And now you're using me to go against my dad, knowing how important my dad is to me. Like, why would you do this? And then because I think for him, he feels like he's being betrayed by someone he does care about, because he actually likes Clarice a lot. He wouldn't talk to his dad about her as much if he didn't, if but I'm sure maybe his dad probably, like, poisoned that well a little bit by being like, yeah, that woman, she's just using you. And so believing his dad so much, he probably just listened to everything he said. So, but obviously Julia like gave them the good news that she knew she wasn't able to fax everything. So what she did is she put it in an envelope and it's basically mailed it to her grandma. And she's like, yeah, you guys are going to have all those files in 3 to 5 days. And everyone's like, yeah, everyone's getting excited. Even Clark being so happy, like, oh my God. Because like they make a reference early on in the episode, it's like, who is she, Nancy Drew? And it's like, well, Nancy Drew to to save the day, And I think Julia kind of feels proud of herself. Obviously, Clarice is like, I never wanted you or Aaron to kind of put yourselves in danger, but for Julia, it's like once you kind of know the truth, you kind of can't unsee it. So she's like, I never thought I'd be able to do something like this. Clarice is like, I would have thought so, So I thought that was kind of nice. Hopefully, nothing happens. They are giving her 24-hour protection. Hopefully, but it's still like we got people like this who have the connections they do, could still, I don't know, make things happen on that front, So, they were able to kind of sneak someone to kill someone under FBI custody and stuff like that. So, but that was more so to make a point. They did handle Naomi the way they did as well by making it like an overdose. So, you're just hoping that everything works out for Aaron and Julia. At this point in time, there's probably like nothing they can do. The FBI's got what the FBI's got, so like killing her is just going to bring more attention upon them. So it's like, let's not do that. To the point that Hagen ends up calling Ruth later on, and he wants Ruth to drop things, but it's like, nah, like, yeah, you've been a good donor and stuff like that, but I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to ignore justice and stuff like that, because she's already in a position where it's like all this stuff is going to come back to bite her in the ass. Like, there's already people who are going to want to take this position from her and everything, being AG and everything, so she's already got to fight on like an uphill battle in that regard, plus this. But he's suggesting like, right, Lila Gums, Bill's mom, hasn't pressed charges. At least she hasn't yet. The fact of the matter is, it's almost suggesting like, we will push her to press charges against your daughter, who was seen as a victim, will be seen as a perpetrator, and like all this bright future she had for herself will go down the drain, and not just her, you as well. So call it off, Ruth. And so she's kind of being forced in a position where it's like kind of similar position to Paul. Now the question is, what is Ruth going to do? Like, is Ruth someone that's going to like, no, I'm not going to let anyone back down? But to be fair, everything she has done is in her own. She does love her daughter, so she wouldn't want Catherine compromised, especially because Catherine's in a position of getting better to some extent now. So it's going to be interesting to see where things take on that front, like what she will do. Another aspect to this episode is Ardelia. Like, she filed a complaint last episode, and her boss calls her in about it. He's like, oh, I just want you to know, like, if there's any questions, she's like, questions? So she has to keep this, like, demeanor, because, once again, it's a great line that, from, Edgar, John Carlo Esposito, from, The Boys, where it's like, oh, like raging out, losing my, like ranting and stuff like that. It's like, oh, that's a white man's privilege. Like, I think in that moment, Ardelia was like, right, I can't give you the satisfaction of me flipping out because I know you up here trying to pretend like you're with us. It's on some BS. Like you're fronting and whatever. And it's like, why is that? And Ardelia kind of figures like, because he's trying to be an ally, because that way basically you won't see it coming when they're kind of like, they start to squeeze, because they're making it seem like, oh, we're helping you, trying to create the narrative of like, right, it's not us, it's you. You're interpreting things wrong. You're reading things wrong. Like, we've been supportive all the way. And then later on, her buddy ends up getting promoted, but basically his job is going to take him to be like security away from all of this. So like, he gets a promotion, but it's him out of the picture. They're trying to divide and conquer. And, the whole thing, it's like, Ardelia brought it up earlier. Well, they had the conversation earlier about the whole squeezing gang. It's like, this is him squeezing. And Ardelia is like, if it ever gets too tight, like, we need to make a deal. If it ever gets too tight, if even one of us is kind of like being squeezed, or being drowned, like, we need to like say. But for him, it's like, oh, I can hold my breath. Like, he was like a particular like champ of holding his breath for a while. So he's like, I'm good. Because if he had taking a position, he loses his career. If he doesn't take the position, he's going to lose his career. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't thing. But this fight's too important to stop here. And obviously, warning Ardelia, like, obviously the noose is like essentially going to get tighter going forward. So that's a fight on its own front. But another aspect to this is the situation with Clarice. Remembering that memory with her dad, and then like she starts remembering it a little differently at the end because her dad's like, "Oh, I need you to do something for me." Interestingly enough, there's moths around that lamp, but it's like obviously like her dreams, like because obviously at the time like her dream at the beginning coincided with the case, so like she kind of got a clearer picture on certain aspects of the case, but now she's also kind of getting a little bit more clarity on her dad not being who she thought he was. Like, for example, but that's why I was like, is that those moths or whatever behind, like are those just regular moths, or is that just kind of like the Bill thing folding in, or does she actually have some personal experience with those moths and she just doesn't realize it? That maybe everything she's been seeing about Bill isn't just about Bill alone, that maybe it's about her circumstances as well. But basically, like from her memory, she thought she saw her dad in a uniform confronting these guys, but in actuality, he's just in regular clothes, and he doesn't have his gun on his side. He had something else, and he gives her money to go handle something, and so she gives the guys the money, and then they take it, and the guy's like, "Your dad's a thief." So I'm assuming like he makes a lot of like he might have a gambling issue. Maybe that's what that is. Like a bookie or whatever, like he owed money to, and it's like he sent his daughter as just kind of like, right, this way, you would never hurt a little girl, right? So, you know, she's delivering the money. Maybe it's like probable deniability because like, oh, I never handed any money over. It was my daughter. Like maybe that. Once again, why he's allowed to do whatever he wants to, and like why like Clarice's mom never stepped in. Maybe it's because it's like she's so young. No matter what I do, she'll always take her dad's side. So, or maybe she just wasn't aware of how bad things are. Because we never found out like why she was yelling at him. But maybe it could be finances. Like maybe that's why they didn't really have any money. Like why she had to send Clarice and everything away, because like their dad gambled all the money away. Like so maybe that wasn't like money he owed. That might have been him placing a bet or something. Maybe that's what that was. I don't know. But now it's like, you know, for her, she built her entire identity around, like as I brought up earlier, the whole thing of like, I handle things on my own because that's what her dad did. Her, you know, and she's mimicking that. Like her notions of like what's a good cop, a good cop handles things on their own. They kind of don't ask for help. So that's why she's reluctant kind of to rely on other people. Like just in her mind is like, my dad was able to be such a great cop, a good person because of it. But now it's like, maybe my dad wasn't the best person. That might be why he was such a loner. Not that like, oh, he didn't have anyone he could turn to. Maybe no one wanted to be there for him because of who he was. Or maybe it's just because he didn't have people near him and because he liked to do some shady stuff. Maybe that's it, maybe not. I don't know. But she built her entire foundation of who she is. And now it's like, right, everything you've kind of built myself into is based on a lie, potentially. Like, my dad wasn't who I thought he was, you know? So, we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all that ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, enjoy it, good day, and goodbye.